The seventh episode of Legend of the Galactic Heroes, titled Iserlohn Taken, or Iserlohn Captured, depending on who you ask, sees the Rosenritter and Yang's 13th Fleet pull off their plan to take the untakeable Iserlohn Fortress, an Imperial space base armed with one of the most powerful weapons seen in this war, a beam cannon called Thor's Hammer, capable of destroying thousands of ships in a single shot. The plan is brilliant in its simplicity. The Rosenritter, a band of Imperial deserters, Trojan horse their way into the fortress by posing as a badly damaged ship with a captain dying of internal injuries, who has critical intel on the actions of the Free Planet Alliance. In short order, the Rosenritter takes the fortress command hostage, disables the command, and then disables the defenses, allowing the Alliance fleet to dock and take over. While this was happening, an Imperial fleet was scrambled, and now sit outside the fortress, the fleet commander insisting on charging in, despite the Alliance now controlling Thor's hammer. Yang finds himself forced to order the hammer's use, not once, but twice, when the first blast doesn't force a retreat. And Yang finds this weapon very unsettling.
敵艦10隻以上瞬時に消滅。たった一発で。すげえ破壊力だ。提督、こいつは戦闘と呼べるものではありませんな。一方的な虐殺だ。
確かにその通りだ。帝国軍の悪い真似を我々がすることはない。彼らに改めて降伏を勧告してくれ。降伏が嫌なら逃げるように。追撃はしないと。
逃げるように？敵に向かって逃げろだって？
不服か？
いえ、なんていうか、我々は提督の下で戦うことを光栄に思います。とっても。
On April 26, 1937, during the Spanish Civil War, German and Italian allies of the rebel nationalist faction carried out an aerial bombing on the town of Guernica, a shocking military attack against civilians. 24 planes dropped 550 pounds of medium-high explosives and 110 pounds of light explosives on a town of just 7,000 people. The exact death toll is disputed. Some early sources claimed up to 1,700, but nowadays is believed to be more in the area of 300. The attack sparked strong reactions around the world. Among those appalled by the attack was the Archbishop of Canterbury, Cosmo Gordon Land. In an appeal written for the Times, the Archbishop wrote, "Who can think at this present time without a sickening of the heart of the appalling slaughter, the suffering, the manifold misery brought by war to Spain and to China? Who can think without horror of what another widespread war would mean, raged as it would be with all the new weapons of mass destruction?" This is the earliest known use of the term weapons of mass destruction, something that has come to be defined as weapons that create destruction on a massive scale, killing indiscriminately. Of course, the weapons predate the name. The First World War saw the creation of modern chemical warfare, most famously the use of mustard gas. During the Middle Ages, plague-infested corpses would be catapulted over enemy walls, early biological warfare. But the modern perception of weapons of mass destruction didn't really come about until the invention of nuclear weapons. The first test nuclear detonation taking place at the Trinity site on July 16, 1945. It had been predicted that the blast would yield the energy of as much as 10 kilotons of TNT, but in fact yielded the energy of 18.6 kilotons of TNT. Famously, the director of the Los Alamos Laboratory, J. Robert Oppenheimer, had a somber reaction to the creation of the first world-ending weapon.
Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
Of course, you don't need to tell the Japanese the history of the nuclear bomb. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are etched into Japan's cultural identity, the horror of those events having informed a lot of Japanese art and media over the past 70 plus years. And it is horrible. The creation and advancement of nuclear weaponry has given us a means to end human civilization by our own hands. It's the most common source for the end of the world in post-apocalyptic fiction, and has left us as a species with various levels of anxiety. An anxiety that can be preyed upon for political motivation. So, you want to invade this oil-rich country? Well, maybe they have weapons of mass destruction. Science fiction, especially space operas with their planet-hopping star cruisers and interactions with alien races, can often struggle with communicating the scale of the weaponry being used. Consider the photon torpedo in the Star Trek franchise. Narratively, this weapon is treated as a sci-fi reskin of a classic naval torpedo. A lot of the space combat in Star Trek emulates naval combat. But within the fiction, within this universe, what actually is a photon torpedo? It's an antimatter weapon, creating a massive explosion from the interaction of matter and antimatter, and is capable of destroying a whole city from orbit. They're basically souped up super nuclear weapons that get tossed around by hero and villain alike without much thought towards their potential for apocalyptic scale destruction. And when that destruction does come about, it feels less horrific because of the scale of things. When we talk about the use of weapons of mass destruction in our real world, it's tragic because this is the one world we all have. If we mess this up, we're stuck with it. A world getting messed up in a large galaxy-spanning setting feels less tragic, even if billions of people die, even if the world is rendered uninhabitable. Because in space, there's a near infinite amount of worlds, a near infinite amount of people. It's easy to just kinda forget about these deaths. Visually, Thor's hammer evokes the most famous weapon of mass destruction in science fiction, the Death Star from Star Wars. Both are moon-sized military bases with the most destructive weapon created by man crafted on one side. In Star Wars, we see this weapon used in its full capacity only once, with the destruction of the planet Alderaan, the home of Princess Leia. At least millions are killed, probably billions, but the impact of the planet's destruction feels incredibly minimal. Obi-Wan Kenobi senses it and is momentarily disturbed, but quickly brushes it off. Leia, having just witnessed the loss of her home, her family, recovers from the shock in record time and is quipping and adventuring like nothing happened. Now, to be clear, this isn't a criticism of science fiction works that don't address the weapons of mass destruction in their arsenal. It's not wrong that these stories do this. Star Wars wouldn't be as good of a movie if we had to spend 20 minutes of Luke comforting Leia as she cries through extreme levels of grief. My point is that science fiction has the luxury to not address this issue, a luxury not so easily given to other genres. So when Legend of the Galactic Heroes takes the time to comment on how awful Thor's hammer is, how tragic it is to have to use it, that is exceptional for science fiction. The episode sets itself up as one of extreme violence. Building up to this moment with Thor's hammer, we have the Rosenritter fighting their way through the base, forced to use axes and other melee weapons because guns would cause a devastating explosion. And I was shocked at how gruesome this segment is. We've never seen this level of blood and carnage in the show before. The nature of these space battles mean people get blown up and vaporized, but never butchered. Even faux Caesar getting stabbed didn't bleed like this. So when Yang takes control of Iserlohn Fortress, the show has already told us this is going to be a moment of extreme violence. But Yang is not a violent person. He hates war. He hates war culture. He hates his position in the Alliance. And here he is, his hand forced to use a weapon that kills indiscriminately on a scale never before felt. And he has to use this weapon of mass destruction twice to force a surrender from enemy forces. As he looks at the destruction, he seems an awful lot like Oppenheimer. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. One of our anxieties concerning nuclear war is the quality of the person put in charge of pressing the button. Someone who is eager, happy to unleash nuclear fury on their enemies should not have that chance. We shouldn't be in this position to begin with, but we are. So I would rather have people like Yang in this position, someone who does everything they can to avoid pressing that button. Yang would rather allow the enemy to retreat in full than press the button. And the destruction is so monstrous, so great that Yang's immediate impulse is to try to resign. He's eventually talked out of it. Only a good man should have this responsibility. God forgive a good man.